Over the past year, I've been studying and critiquing the obstacles that precede Pokémon's numerous gym leaders. Simple as most of them are, gyms are the primary benchmarks in titles responsible for introducing millions of people to video games, which I think makes their structure worth examining. Rather than simply pointing at a set of children's games and saying they could be more difficult, however, I've found it's a lot more fun developing original gym concepts and exploring what I think gyms could be. Pursuing that is what's led me to create a league of my own, though that title is something of an understatement. The goal of this series is to develop and share hypothetical designs for original gym layouts and obstacles corresponding to each of Pokémon's 18 types, drawing on the trends established by the game's existing facilities, applying my own game and puzzle design philosophies, expanding on underused concepts, and exploring ideas not yet tackled in the mainline titles. Each gym pitched as a part of this series includes a summary of what I've identified as the type's unique traits, an explanation of a hypothetical gym structure that supports one or more of those traits, and a description of a theoretical gym leader to oversee the place. I'll also be noting relevant team members, moves, and abilities as necessary, but it's not my intention to pair each pitch with detailed team sheets. After all, plenty of other folks have already devoted countless hours to the intricacy of boss battle design. For instance, there's Rory the Fiend, who's been a vocal and valued supporter of my work, and who recently made a great video describing gym-adjacent challenges and bosses to spotlight those types not represented in the classic Kanto League. This video is the second entry in my League series. The first features gyms specializing in grass, fire, and water as a nod to the elemental trio players pick from at the start of most games. Carrying the parallel forward, this entry will cover designs based on types commonly associated with early game areas and bosses, namely Normal, Rock, and Bug. I don't mean to shackle them to that standard, however. Comments on the last entry made it clear that I wasn't the only one intrigued by the idea of a late-game bug gym. If you're interested in some additional commentary on canon gyms to serve as a baseline, I've assembled a playlist of my relevant gym reviews and linked it in the description. Speaking of baselines though, I think Normal would be the best place to start this new set. Despite the type's name, Normal has only ever been, at best, Pokémon's second most common type overall. Normal type moves are actually much more prolific, being the only type to have more moves of said type than actual species. Of course, being the series' de facto default typing makes it the most sensible choice for simple techniques like Growl and Leer. Normal remains one half of the series' most common dual typing, that being Normal and Flying, but that only highlights how one of its key features is the need to lean on other types. Not only is Normal the type most commonly shed upon evolution, it's the only type to lose entire evolutionary lines, with the likes of Clefairy, Togepi, and Snubbull being fully swapped to Fairy starting in Generation 6. Likewise, most abilities capable of changing the typing of the Pokémon bearing them or their attacks are tied to Normal types. Color Change, Forecast, Multi-type, and RKS system are all exclusive to Pokémon that are pure Normal types in their base forms. The same goes for Imposter, the signature ability of Ditto, the transform Pokémon itself. There's also a growing category of abilities that change the user's Normal type moves into another type, granting a 20% boost on top of the newly gained same type attack bonus. The value of exchanging Normal for something less ordinary is evident when considering its plain list of type interactions. Outside of the inverse battles available in Generation 6, Normal can't hit anything for super effective damage. It's resisted by Rock and Steel, and completely ineffective against Ghost. Such a short and simple list can work to the type's advantage, however. Viewing the Normal type as a glass half full reveals its ability to hit the other 15 types for neutral damage. More attention's naturally paid to type advantages and disadvantages, but neutral effectiveness against more than 80% of the type chart means Normal is operating with a degree of base applicability matched only by Dragon types. And unlike Dragons, Normal types only have a singular weakness to cover for. What normal types lack in resistances can be compensated for somewhat with their above-average HP stats, and what they lack in terms of same-type super effective options, they can often make up for in their remarkably varied learn sets. Smeargle is obviously the poster child for moveset versatility, but consider the potential to be found in something as simple as Jigglypuff in Generation 1. In games where many Pokémon have to rely on TMs for the most reliable moves of their respective types, Jigglypuff learns the coveted Body Slam through level up, and it can fill out the rest of its kit with any of its 30 compatible TMs. A review of those TMs shows nearly 2/3 of them to be of types other than normal, including Thunderbolt, Flamethrower, Psychic, Solar Beam, Ice Beam, and Bubble Beam, as well as Water Gun. Gen 1 really is something special. Normal is Pokemon's jack-of-all-trades type. They may not have the super effective appeal of ground or fighting types, but normal type's status as metaphorical blank pages means they offer more room to experiment and build unique identities. Schools are common enough sights in Pokémon games. Scarlet and Violet go so far as making their color-swapped academies a central hub and the jumping-off point for all 3 of its main quest lines, including its gyms. Of course, Paldea is not the first time we've seen schools with ties to gyms or their leaders. The direction I chose to take this school in this normal-type pitch, however, is a bit more specialized. Imagine an institute of music, where the study of subjects like music theory, composition, conducting, and performance serve to strengthen its students' bonds with their Pokémon, as well as their musical talents. The harmony fostered by its instructors has been credited with the development of both fine musicians and skilled battlers. There are 2 things I should acknowledge about this premise before proceeding. First, I do have some musical training, but nothing formal for more than 10 years. If music or music education is your area of expertise and you care to share ideas regarding this facility, I'd love to read them in the comments. Second, on the subject of viewer responses, this normal-type school-based gym is similar to one described in the comments on the previous League video, at least in broad strokes. A user going by, "Oh my gosh, it's a leg," shared an idea for an art school with trainers using customized Smeargles, which I think sounds incredible. There were a lot of great concepts floated in the comments on that video, and I love seeing the discussion they've inspired. Among them were a few that the original commenters said I could develop further if I wished, which is really nice. Aside from general ideas like an early game ice gym or a late game bug gym, however, I don't have any specific plans to follow up on viewer-submitted gym concepts, at least not right now. My intent for the initial run of this series is to develop a gym of each type that's as much my own original work as I can manage for the sake of the creative challenge. If you've got an idea you'd really like to see me address in the future though, don't hesitate to share it with a note saying you're cool with me using it. I do still keep a record of comments that most pique my interest. Alright, back to the subject at hand. I chose the music school setting for a couple of reasons. The first was the fact that the series' music is one aspect that's always been received positively as far as I know. If there are soundtrack detractors out there, they're not as vocal as the folks that get riled up about other elements of the games. The second reason was to highlight sound-based moves similar to the spotlight I gave wind moves in my grass gym pitch. Sound-based moves have existed as a category since Generation 3, with Soundproof being among the original abilities introduced in Ruby and Sapphire. The list of associated moves is a bit longer and more widely distributed than wind moves as a result. In fact, as of Generation 9, sound-based moves outnumber rock-type moves. That frequency is just one piece of evidence fans use to support the idea of sound becoming its own distinct type. I don't personally subscribe to the sound-type school of thought, but rather than launch into a lecture about type identities, balancing, and the extent of proposed reclassifications, I'll just say I imagined this gym as an early game challenge, so focusing more on the normal type half of the move list sounds good to me. Trainers hoping to win this gym's badge will first need to demonstrate their timing and tactics in a series of challenges administered by 3 of the school's tutors. Each of the tutors can be found in one of these specially marked classrooms or practice rooms, though players could also audit some of the other classes and learn more about sound-based moves. Tidbits like the soundproof and punk rock abilities affecting the damage dealt by sound-based moves, or the way those moves can hit a target behind substitute. The tutors' tests all follow the same format. First, a rhythm challenge. Players are presented with a musical staff with sets of stacked circles indicating the position of individual notes. The tutor sets the tempo with their instrument of choice, at which point a cursor starts cycling through the first set of notes. Press A on the beat corresponding to the note marked in blue, then the cursor will move on to the next set. Complete the exercise, and the tutor will agree to a battle. Each of these battles will be fought as doubles, or as they might say in this context, duets. The rhythm portion may not pose much of a challenge, but I think a series of early game double battles is a great way to get players thinking more strategically. It also provides a means of amplifying the effectiveness of some otherwise less memorable normal types. Consider the move Round, a simple 60 base power attack with a secondary effect capable of dramatically shifting the tone of a battle. Imagine a challenger sends out a Mankey against a tutor's Smeargle and Jigglypuff. Going purely off base stats, Smeargle should move first, then Mankey, with Jigglypuff moving last in the turn. If Smeargle and Jigglypuff both use Round that turn, however, Jigglypuff will immediately follow Smeargle's attack with its own, which will have its base power doubled to 120. Not sure what the damage calculations would look like at such low levels, but it sounds hilarious. The duet battle potential isn't limited to offensive bonuses either. I wanted to whip up a new sound-based move to be featured here in the Conservatory, and I settled on Soothing Tune. It's a simple healing move that can restore up to a quarter of the user's HP if they target themselves, or up to a third if they target an ally. Nothing special when compared to the likes of Heal Pulse, but it can affect an ally behind substitute, it's usable in both single and double battles, and it facilitates cute moments where a Pokémon supports its partner with a little song. The gym's rhythm challenges may not be as intricate as the tactics I'm describing, but making interesting early game normal type encounters is a puzzle in its own right. After acing each tutor's test, they'll each resume their own practice sessions, the products of which filter out and intermingle to produce an upbeat tune as a prelude to facing the gym leader. The Conservatory's gym leader can be found in one of the school's modest concert halls, conducting a lesson with a duo newly under her tutelage. Introducing Octavia, a beloved elder instructor whose unassuming appearance belies the extent of her musical talents and the breadth of her battling knowledge. It's a rare student indeed who manages to throw her off her groove. Her name comes from octave, which refers to the interval between 2 notes with the same letter designation, one having twice the frequency of the other. For example, A and A. Octavia welcomes the player and praises their performance against the tutors. Double battles, she says, are more than 2 singles occurring simultaneously. A skilled trainer can find the rhythm that fits their team best, synchronize their strengths, and oh, what symphonies you'll create. She explains that her Chatot is still set on flying solo, and invites the player to assist in a teamwork exercise. Octavia leads with Eevee and the troublesome Chatot. Eevee can offer support in the form of Helping Hand or Growl, which hits both opponents in a double battle. Chatot's signature Chatter attack also hits both opponents, as well as its ally. It also has a 100% chance to confuse its target, at least in its latest form. It may be an effective means of handling fighting types, but that little victory could ring a bit hollow. Just to support the problem student narrative, I think it'd be fun if Chatot operated like an overleveled traded Pokémon, at least for this match, acting out and selecting chatter when a more experienced trainer would be inclined to pick a different move. Waiting in the wings is Octavia's more experienced duo, featuring Wigglytuff and a little guy I've named Acapella, a normal and ground type Marmot Pokémon. Wigglytuff can also deal with fighting types thanks to Disarming Voice. Alternatively, it can set up a substitute to shield itself while it tries to hit targets with Sing, or it can run the round combo with Acapella. I imagine Acapella being more support-oriented, with Soothing Tune to offset the HP cost of Substitute and its new Harmonize ability, which boosts the power of its sound-based attacks and those of its allies by 20%. Should Octavia choose to run Acapella beside a partner using spread moves like Chatter or Echoed Voice, Acapella can use Dig to remove itself as a target for a turn. 4 Pokémon on a second or third gym leader's team may seem like a lot, but between the resources the game might provide and Chatot's potential for sabotage, I think there's an easy balance to be found. Besides, once I settled on the Barbershop Quartet Groundhog design, any lineup with less than 4 would have been a missed opportunity. Octavia rewards victorious challengers with the Harmony Badge, the TM for Soothing Tune, and a Throat Spray, which boosts the holder's special attack by 1 stage after using a sound-based move. Assuming the boosts from Harmonize and the round combo aren't out of control, I could see Octavia running one on Wigglytuff as well. I considered giving a metronome item as a prize, but I think that would incentivize the sort of single attack spamming behavior that's so easy to fall into in most gyms. Plus, it's only thematically relevant, not mechanically so. Like I established in the first League video, I like the idea of gyms being places players can return to throughout the game for further training. Maybe a later visit sees Octavia's Eevee evolved into a star pupil Sylveon, overshadowing Chatot with pixelate boosted hyper voices. Perhaps Octavia's absent during one instance and another instructor's filling in for the day. They may not be as skilled a battler, but they can offer to teach one of the player's Pokémon substitute. Having designed this gym as an early game challenge, I don't think there's much that could be done to tone it down, apart from reducing the number of tutors players have to beat down to 2, or diluting their double battle strategies. More challenging battles are a given for a gym with increased difficulty. The rhythm challenge may need some reworking though. The first method I'd consider for leveling up the timing component would be to either increase the tempo with each note, or mix them up so players have to pay more attention. The jingles I chose only use a handful of notes, so the timed button presses could be swapped for different inputs like the ocarina in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. Another option would be to borrow from the former and make it a call and response challenge with increasingly longer sequences to remember and repeat. As type specialists, gym leaders have long been the bedrock on which beginners base their understanding of certain types. The Pewter Gym is a prime example. Outside of starters, most movesets available before battling Brock are made up of entry-level fare like Tackle, Peck, and Poison Sting. Those moves represent 3 of the 4 types that Rock resists. Combine that with Brock's pre-battle reference to rock-hard defense, and a new player is likely to walk away with the impression that Rock is an effective defensive type, one with exploitable but uncommon weaknesses. Shift a Rock specialist to a later stage of the game, however, and that facade quickly crumbles. Water and Grass are 2 of the most common types, and both tend to target Rock type's lesser special defense. Brock suggests his team is impervious to most physical attacks in the Johto games, which is a diplomatic way of acknowledging that Fighting and Ground are 2 of the series' most proficient physical attacking types, in addition to both being super effective against Rock. It's true that the average Rock type's base defense is well above those found among other types, but if you're going by averages, the average base attack among fighting types is the highest average stat of any type. There's no real reprieve to be found in abilities either. Sturdy offers some solace, especially for dual types, whose rock typing often amplifies weaknesses rather than shielding them. Solid Rock reduces super effective damage taken by 25%, but it's only available on 4 species as of Generation 9, and one of them's not even a rock type, much to its benefit. Those first 4 weaknesses are troublesome enough, but no type draws Rock's defensive shortcomings into sharper relief than Steel, its 5th and final weakness. Steel only has 3 weaknesses compared to Rock's 5, it resists 10 types to Rock's 4, and it even upgrades Rock's poison resistance to a full immunity. Steel, like Ground, also shares Rock's immunity to Sandstorm damage. Rock types are at least unique for the 50% special defense boost they get while a Sandstorm's in effect, but it's hardly enough to rival Steel's defensive capabilities. What about Rock's offensive capabilities then? It hits 4 types for super effective damage, which puts it on par with fire and ice types, and 1 advantage shy of fighting and ground types. Rock actually makes for a great coverage type, giving fighting and ground types a means of hitting flying types they'd otherwise struggle with. The impact of a rock weakness is perhaps best exemplified by the type-based damage inflicted by Stealth Rock. Its ability to deal up to half of a Pokemon's max HP and damage as soon as they hit the field has warped competitive play in a way few other effects ever could. Rock type's biggest pitfall in terms of offense is their long-standing battle with accuracy. In Generation 1, for instance, the only rock type attacks were Rock Throw with its 65% chance to hit, and Rock Slide with a more acceptable 90% chance. Distribution was arguably a bigger problem back then though, since Rock Slide could only be learned by TM, and Rock Throw was exclusive to Onix and the Geodude line. Even 30 years later, there's no widely available rock-type moves with 100% accuracy above 80 base power. And 2 of the 3 moves common enough to consider are special attacks. Back on the subject of averages, the base power of the handful of rock attacks with perfect accuracy works out to about 65 base power. That's comparable to Ice-type attacks, but not only does Ice have more options, their list includes the likes of Ice Beam and Freeze Dry. The rock type's historically been touted as a defensive type, in spite of its myriad weaknesses, and apart from a few standout cases, most Pokemon weighed down with rock typing have failed to hit that mark, ending up sorry rather than safe. Going subterranean's a natural route to take a rock-type gym, but gyms like Oreburgh and Driftvale have already tapped the mining industry for inspiration. My design carries traces of that aesthetic, but I thought it'd be more interesting to draw on my own fond memories of visiting caverns on school trips and family vacations. Imagine then a repurposed salt mine that's seen its pits and shafts modified to create educational facilities dedicated to geology and subterranean ecology, habitats for rock-type Pokemon, and the main attraction as far as this video is concerned, battle arenas. Trainers looking to leave these caves with a new badge to their name will first have to navigate some of the less public passageways and overcome a series of unique battles arranged to test their ability to adapt to disadvantages. Each arena is preceded by a maze segment, the duration of which depends on the challenger. The first segment hardly seems like much of a maze though, seeing as the corridor terminates a few paces in. Activating one of the panels at the end momentarily leaves the challengers with even less to see, since doing so cuts the lights. Now, if the thought of low-light navigation sparks flashbacks to stumbling around areas like Kanto's Rock Tunnel or Hoenn's Granite Cave, never fear. The cave's lights have an ultraviolet setting that kicks in and reveals a new way forward, paved with patches of fluorescent rocks. This newly revealed path leads through an otherwise obscured corridor and on through to the exit of this introductory segment. Along the way, challengers pick up an item referred to as a luck stone, the purpose of which I'll describe in a moment. Attentive players may recall another item in their field of view before the passageway went dark. The fluorescent path doesn't point in its direction, but anyone that chooses to delve a bit deeper will be rewarded with another luck stone. These stones are an integral part of the battles that take place in this gym's arenas. Each begins by drawing attention to a board resembling a pinball or pachinko machine. However, instead of paddles, point values, or prizes at the bottom, each pocket corresponds to an effect that will change the battle scenario. The luck stones collected in the preceding maze fill the role of the ball or puck, hence the guaranteed pickup in each maze. Challengers that explore and collect more stones are then rewarded with the opportunity to take additional turns on the board. However, those rerolls overwrite the previous result, rather than just letting players pick between them. I already alluded to the Oreburg Gym, which will be familiar to anyone that's journeyed through the Sinnoh region, but only a fraction will have faced this board concept's antecedent, the roulette grid featured in Generation 4's Battle Arcade. The gym stays true to the idea of pre-battle shakeups, but in addition to the change of the board layout, it comes with a modified set of events that can be triggered. Whereas the arcade could see whole teams inflicted with paralysis or poison, I wanted to carve out a list with stronger links to rock types specifically. Some of the effects I settled on include starting the battle with Stealth Rock already set on one side of the field, or implementing a passive Salt Cure effect, which produces an effect similar to Sandstorm damage while making it harder for Water and Steel types to sweep. Another effect would involve swapping a team's held items for ones that affect the holder's speed stat, like the Iron Ball, or their priority bracket, like the Lagging Tail, effectively neutralizing the speed advantage many Pokémon have over rock types. These effects could be applied evenly to both sides of the field, but I did describe this gym as testing challengers' ability to handle disadvantages, so I think it's in keeping with that ethos to allow for lopsided scenarios. For that reason, I'd include a rotating element that freezes when a stone is launched. The side whose color gets locked in is the side the effect gets applied to. The gym trainers get a turn too, so it may be to the player's advantage to let them go first. The number of potential events would increase with each stage, though some would depend on whether the gym requires challengers to enter with a team of 3 like most post-game battle facilities. For example, there could be events that randomly exchange one or more Pokémon from one trainer's team with an equal number from their opponent's team. Monotype gyms tend to reward players who stack their teams with advantageous types. What better way then to highlight a gym's specialty than putting players in a position where they have to win with that type against team members they brought to beat it. Given the rock type's risk versus reward nature, I could have gone in a direction modeled much more closely on the game corners of games past. However, a gym with luck and chance at its core simply doesn't appeal to me. It sounds like the basis for a trash gym, honestly. By pairing the guaranteed stone pickup with the option for players to seek out more of them and try shifting the balance in their favor, there's a lot more room to tailor your experience. Do you roll on through and take whatever the board gives you first? Or do you slow things down and take advantage of the branching paths to try and gain a bit more control over the battles leading up to the gym leader? Speaking of the gym leader, I imagined this gym as a 5th gym or thereabouts. So after completing 4 of these chance battle trials, challengers would enter the 5th arena to face the man who set this whole facility's founding into motion. Introducing Calliston, a determined caving enthusiast who's refused to let a physical disability bar him from his hands-on appreciation of geology or dampen his development as a Pokémon trainer. As a rock-type specialist, he knows a thing or two about pressing ahead even when the odds aren't stacked in his favor. His name has multiple roots. The first is calcium carbonate, which is the substance that makes up most stalactites and stalagmites. The second is callus, which refers to hardened patches of skin that form as a result of friction and pressure. And the third, the ston suffix, is the simplest, being derived from the word stone. If that's too many layers, he also goes by Cal. Calliston commends players for the grit they've demonstrated by reaching the last stage of the challenge. Real strength, he says, doesn't come from building some unshakable wall, but from the willingness to pick up the pieces, learn, and try again. One last go with the luck stones to see how the scenario shakes out, and the battle begins. Like the gym leaders I outlined in my first league video, I wanted Cal's battle to involve some sort of type-relevant field effect. Sandstorm's an obvious choice, but I saw Cal's team as a chance to highlight rock-type offense. Sandstorm's benefits are largely defensive, so while the challenger may start the battle with Stealth Rock already set on their side, weathering hits is a secondary concern for Calliston. The core of his strategy is making his hits count for more. His first Pokémon could depend on the game he's battled in, starting with Soul Rock in one version and leading with Lunatone in the other. Their different builds offer a bit of variety, but their main role on the team is to set up Trick Room to turn their teammates' low speed stats to their advantage. One Pokémon who could benefit from Trick Room would be Cradily, who could use the reverse turn order to fish for flinches with Rock Slide. Ironically, Grass is one of the best types to pair with Rock. Cradily takes neutral damage from grass and ground attacks, and it can dampen moves like Bulldoze and Earthquake with grassy terrain. Storm Drain upgrades Cradily's water neutrality to an immunity, and turns any water attacks into special attack boosts. With powered up Giga Drains in addition to passive healing from grassy terrain and/or Leech Seed, Cradily could prove one tough barnacle to pry out the battlefield. Assuming Cradily doesn't soak up all the Trick Room turns, Cal could shatter a couple would-be counters with Garganical. Level 38's an evolution threshold that exceeds the caps of a lot of 5th gyms, and it's not even the team's ace. But gym leaders aren't always bound to those limits anyway. Besides, Garganical's a perfect fit for the Salt Mine setting. Stack it up with some blend of Salt Cure, Body Press, and the Elemental Punches, and it'll threaten even seasoned trainers. Next is something simultaneously off-type and on-theme. The standard Corsola, with its water-rock typing, doesn't tend to offer much in terms of offense or defense. Its Galarian variant, being a pure ghost type, is another matter entirely. Its fighting immunity and ghost weakness makes it a great tag team partner for Garganical, whose Purifying Salt ability grants it a rare resistance to ghost type attacks. The Eviolite item isn't a stone per se, but the ITE suffix is commonly used in reference to minerals. Pop it on a Corsola, and its bulk surpasses Cursola's without contest. With those defenses, it stands a chance of actually accumulating an Omni Boost or two from Ancient Power, a feat few proper rock types can boast. Salt's preservative qualities may be at odds with a decayed Pokémon like Corsola, but there's hardly a species that speaks to the importance of preserving habitats than Corsola's Galarian counterparts, rock type or not. By the time Calliston sends out his ace, his 5 turns of Trick Room are likely to be spent. If he was limited to a single mode like most gym leaders, running out the clock like this could pose a major problem. The king of these caves, however, is built different. Meet Swine. This boar's bulky to start, but with its signature erosion ability, landing a hit on Swine drops both of its defenses by 1 stage in exchange for equal boosts to its attack and speed. If Cal runs it with a weakness policy item and reads his opponent right, Swine's first turn could see it staring down challengers with +1 speed and +3 attack. Step aside, Slacking. There's a new 5th gym nightmare. With boosts like that, Rock Slide's flinch chance should be the least of its target's worries. For anyone thinking to pick it off with priority moves, why not surprise them with Accelerock? Cave-ins would be a primary concern in a gym like Calliston's, but if a trainer comes in expecting to wipe out an early game wall like Brock's Onyx, a landslide will be the nicest way to describe their loss. Calliston rewards victorious challengers with the Cavern Badge, the TM for Rock Slide, and a wide lens or zoom lens to boost the chance of connecting with said move and others like it. He also extends the invitation to return for further challenges, and like Lavo's reaction labs before him, there's potential for Saltcrust Caverns to take on the role of a Battle Frontier-style post-game facility. As usual, This gym's difficulty could be decreased by reducing the number of stages players have to beat before they can battle Cal. I'm thinking 2 at the lowest. The mazes could also be simplified and the navigation made easier by ditching the low light component. The variety of battle scenarios could also be simplified with some explicitly positive effects added to the mix. Those effects could also be applied equally to both sides to prevent scenarios stacked in the opponent's favor. A more challenging version of the caverns would feature more complicated mazes with less straightforward critical paths. More intense effects like the HP reduction that can occur in the battle arcade could also be added to the boards. The whole challenge could also be set up as a gauntlet, limiting healing options to a low-chance event on the battle scenario boards or single-target heals every few stages. That, however, is getting well into Battle Frontier territory. That said, it would be really funny to see a gym whose specialty's often such a cakewalk turned into a challenge that can really rock an unsuspecting player. Bug is the archetypical early game type, even more so than normal. Between their frequency on starting routes and their low evolution levels, the purpose of many of the most well-known bug types is to teach players the benefits of evolution. They reach their final stage before the first gym, and outside of niche cases and heavy investment, that early power spike is where they peak. I expect that's why we've yet to see a mainline game with a bug gym ranked higher than number 3. Late game specialists aren't a wholly foreign concept, but 2 instances across 30 years can't really compare with the swarms of water, ice, and dragon users. On average, bug types have the lowest base stats of any type, thanks in no small part to their being concentrated in early game areas. Even if they weren't so frail, they'd be fighting an uphill battle on account of bugs' interactions with other types. Its offensive and defensive profiles are remarkably similar to that of grass types. Some valuable resistances, overshadowed by a myriad of common weaknesses and poor offensive matchups. Resistances to both fighting and ground is a combination exclusive to bug types, and advantages against grass, psychic, and dark types can be valuable, but fire, flying, and rock are such common attacking types that the greater utility offered by grass types generally makes them a better choice despite their longer list of weaknesses. The one area in which Bug's defensive makeup works out in its favor is when it's paired with Steel. Unlike Rock, whose vulnerabilities overlap so much that Rock's Steel is ruined by double weaknesses to both fighting and ground, Bug's resistances serve to neutralize most of Steel's weaknesses and vice versa. Bug's Steel Pokémon still have a 4x fire weakness to contend with, but a lone weak point's much easier to defend. In terms of offense, Bug moves parallel Ice in the sense that both types are often used to greater effect by Pokémon not of those types. Avoiding either type's defensive shortcomings easily outweighs the lack of same-type attack bonuses. This goes double in the case of Bug types, whose moves can't compare with the reliability of Ice attacks. Just compare high-power moves like Mega Horn and Blizzard. The former is stronger and more accurate, but its name limits its distribution based on anatomy, while Blizzard has been a TM or similar with broad compatibility in every mainline game. Bug's greatest potential seemingly lies in its utility. The one Bug-type move Pokémon of other types love using above any other is U-turn. Not for the damage it can deal though, but as a means of pivoting to another team member. Rage Powder's value as a redirection move is evident to any competitive doubles player, and a majority of the Pokémon that learn it are non-Bug types. The same goes for the +3 special attack boost from Tail Glow. Even Quiver Dance, whose Japanese name means butterfly dance, isn't exclusive to Bug types. For uniquely Bug-type utility, you need to look to the handful of web-based moves. Spiderweb is meant to prevent its targets from switching out, but it's been meddled with an astonishing amount for such a rare move. It was exclusive to Spinarak and Ariados until Generation 5, then they were given a new signature move in Generation 7 in the form of Toxic Thread, which poisons the target in addition to lowering their speed. Silk Trap is another signature move, being tied specifically to Spidops. It's like Protect or Detect, with the bonus of dropping the opponent's speed if they make contact. Unfortunately, Spidops is so slow that you're not likely to find a scenario where those speed drops will give Spidops an edge. Sticky Web, on the other hand, can be game-changing. It's an entry hazard with decent distribution compared to the other web moves that foregoes damage and status conditions to drop the speed of any grounded Pokémon on the other side by one stage upon switching. Speed can make or break teams, which means a move like Sticky Web can elevate even lowly bug types. Pokemon's origins are often attributed specifically to Satoshi Tajiri's time spent collecting insects as a child, rather than the general act of collecting. If one man's personal interest in entomology were the series' sole inspiration, however, I don't think bug types would be quite so easy to swat aside. As it stands, there's a fair bit of legwork to be done if you're looking to have bug Pokémon stack up against the rest of a player's collection. I'll be honest, I do not care for bugs in real life. It's a compliment to the way Pokémon stylizes insect anatomy that I can tolerate and even enjoy so many bug types, even the spiders. Most bug gyms actually feature spider-specific or at least spider-adjacent elements despite the absence of spider Pokémon on most bug gym leaders' teams. That fact, combined with my own creeping discomfort while pulling real-world reference images, marked spiders as the perfect thread to pull on when developing a bug gym of my own. Imagine then a historic hilltop castle. For centuries, it's been without the hustle and bustle of its original inhabitants. But while a head count of this near-ruins residence may not compare to its heyday, counting legs spins a much more unsettling tale. This gym has no subordinate trainers. There's the standard gym guide to greet challengers and provide pointers, but the only figure visible within the spider silk maze that fills the courtyard is a robed individual methodically spinning thread at the center. To reach the heart of the labyrinth and challenge the gym leader, players have to navigate between the sturdy woven barriers and find the 4 keys to open the way. Apart from a pared-down rendition of the typical gym music, if any, the sounds that mark this gym challenge would be the sound of the aforementioned spinning wheel, the occasional breeze, and the crunch of old leaves beneath the player character's feet. One result of this sparse soundscape is the greater ease with which players could pick up on the sounds of nearby movement. The webbing that makes up the walls isn't so tightly knit as to be opaque, but neither are they see-through, except for the windows granting glimpses of the maze's center. If the sound of rustling isn't enough to draw their attention, sharp-eyed players might pick up on the sight of shivering bundles strung up throughout the maze. Closer inspection reveals them to be small, tied-up bug Pokémon. Each time one's freed, it'll proceed to the nearest of the windows. Interacting with them further prompts a message describing them as looking for their friends. If you've watched my Dungeon Diaries series, you'll know that I'll often use the term key to refer to any object, character, or vital piece of information that allows players to advance through or past an obstacle. In the case of this gym, these little bugs are the 4 keys needed to access the center. The paths between them, however, come with additional complications. Doubling back at any point will reveal that not all of the barriers are static. More often than not, the swaps would occur when the relevant wall segments are well out of view. But players who move and whip the camera around fast enough may catch a glimpse of a dark, many-legged figure propping up a barrier or whisking it away. How these behaviors would be regulated is beyond my current understanding, but whether the results annoyed a player or freaked them out, I'd consider my mission accomplished. The layout I've drafted for this demonstration already offers a handful of routes that can vary wildly based on the state the barriers are in at the start of the challenge, so I can easily imagine a set of randomly selected layouts making every attempt feel unique. No matter how winding the route taken though, every determined challenger would eventually free all 4 bugs. at which point they'll call out and summon a larger bug like Scyther to fly by and cut through the barriers leading into the web-strewn center. No matter which window they're viewed through, the figure at the spinning wheel always has their back turned to the player character. Stepping around to confront them triggers a cutscene where the figure, little more than an intricate puppet, sags and reveals another band of bugs responsible for maneuvering it. They skitter away like the others a moment before, the camera following them to reveal a larger, longer leg reaching out to pull a particular thread from the floor. It snaps, and the whole floor unravels, dropping the player character into the dungeon below, where they're caught by another large but intact web. The camera spins to reveal another robed figure, the human model on whom the puppet was based, as their shadowy arachnid partner effortlessly climbs down from the courtyard above. Introducing Weaver, a reclusive artisan specializing in silk garments. In addition to being fashion statements, a tailored work by Weaver marks its owner as a skilled trainer. Unlike the educators and overseers I've drawn up so far in this series, whose positions imply some level of sociability, I imagine Weaver being a more taciturn trainer, placing them in the same camp as bosses like Alistair and Red. Unless my count's off, there's only 4 Pokemon lines modeled on spiders as of Generation 9. The ace I've alluded to could round out an all-spider squad, but I wanted to set Weaver up as a believable late-game gym leader. It'd take a more knowledgeable battler than me to make Ariados and Spidops imposing, however. 3 out of 5 still sounds suitably spider-themed to me. Weaver leads with Galvantula, whose electric typing neutralizes Bug's weakness to flying, and whose Compound Eyes ability lets it lash out at winged opponents with accuracy-boosted thunders. If Weaver were a lower-ranked gym leader, Galvantula would make for a good sticky web setter. But as a late-game boss, I think they deserve a layer action akin to Saul's Rain Machine. The arena's already lined with webs, and their team would have plenty of experience navigating it, so I think that's justification enough to have sticky web preset on the player's side of the field. Like Saul's Machine, players would be able to temporarily overwrite or remove the field effect, and Weaver could reapply it with a wave of web setters as a free action after a couple of turns. With a move slot freed up, Galvantula could run Giga Drain for rock types, Volt Switch or U-turn to pivot, and either Bug Buzz for damage or Thunder Wave for additional speed control. Next is Araquanid, the one bug type who, thanks to its water bubble ability, actually resists fire type attacks. It can further dampen a challenger's firepower with Rain Dance. Weaver's spiders aren't so itsy-bitsy, and they won't be so easily washed out. It would also have U-turn, allowing it to switch out and come back later to set the rain again as needed. Leech Life could recover health it might lose while calling the rain, and weather-boosted Liquidation offers another anti-rock type option. Normally, I'd list a gym leader's ace last, but with the amount of pivoting this team would be doing, chances are challengers would see Weavers before the final round. Rounding out the spider trio, then, is Spidorius. The ability I crafted for this nefarious arachnid is called Phobia, and it would function like a more active form of the download ability seen on Genesect and the Porygon line. Rather than restricting its boost to the turn Spidorius switches in, it kicks in every time it or an opponent switches in, as Spidorius scans its target to determine which of its defense stats is weakest. The boosts overwrite each other instead of stacking, however. If Spidorius gains a special attack boost upon switching in, and the opponent switches to something with a higher special defense, the ability activates again, dropping its special attack by 1 stage and increasing its attack by 1 stage. I'm sure there's ways to screw with or break an ability like this, but as written, Spidorius could rely on balanced attacking stats and knockoff and dark pulse to ensure it's always doing decent damage. Maybe give it an old school version of Spiderweb to lock down prime targets, and if it's facing something that resists dark, it can pivot with U-turn like the first 2 spiders. The 2 non-spiders are meant to patch up some of the remaining defensive gaps stemming from Bug's weaknesses. Scizor takes neutral damage from rock and only has to worry about a 2x fire weakness as long as it's raining. It can also use Defog to remove Stealth Rock should a challenger bring it to the battle. With Sticky Web active, it could forego Bullet Punch and try for flinches with Iron Head. It's also got U-Turn and options like Tailwind and Close Combat. But if Weaver's in need of fighting type damage, they can switch to Heracross. It can threaten rock and steel types with any decent physical fighting move, then Rock Slide handles fire and flying types. It can even run Aerial Ace against other bug and fighting types. Heracross can't actually learn U-Turn, so it could run some other bug attack and aim to stack attack boosts with its Moxie ability. Fire is still Weaver's greatest vulnerability, even with the rain support. But for nearly every weakness on the team, they've got other team members and coverage moves they can turn to. This much pivoting combined with speed control in the form of persistent Sticky Web would surely irritate some players, but that, in my opinion, is how you do a late game bug gym. Weaver rewards victorious challengers with the Clue Badge, the TM for U-Turn, and a choice scarf of their own design. Their gym doesn't offer much in the way of experience from rematches, but subsequent victories against Weaver could be rewarded with a selection of custom garments to expand the game's character customization options. A quick note about the name of Weaver's badge, since its spelling is likely to raise some eyebrows. The modern word clue, C-L-U-E, can be traced to a Middle English word spelled with an E-W, which referred to a ball of thread. Those familiar with the Greek hero Theseus and his escape from the Minoan labyrinth will remember the critical role played by the Princess Ariadne and her gift of thread as a means for Theseus to retrace his steps. That association in turn led to the modern understanding of a clue as an object or piece of information used in solving a mystery. As much as I like the idea of a spider-themed gym in the role of an 8th gym, my confidence in bug types doesn't extend quite that far. That said, I think adding gym trainers to turn the maze into a gauntlet would undercut the creepy, wish-it-were-empty atmosphere I tried to weave into the place. The maze could be made larger, but I think a better addition would be false walls and hidden passages in addition to the barriers being moved around by Spidorius. In terms of making the gym battle itself more difficult, Weaver could be fought in a double battle, where their Araquanid could use entrainment to share its fire resistance, then blast opponents with spread moves like Surf and Blizzard. A bug-focused double battle even gives String Shot a chance to shine, with buffs in Generation 3 and 6 turning it into a spread move that drops the target's speed by 2 stages. If Weaver relies too much on this sort of speed control though, a trainer who's learned from Caliston could bring Trick Room to trivialize the fight. On the flip side, a version of Weaver's gym that sees them occupying a more traditional bug gym's rank could simplify the maze, perhaps reducing the number of shifting barriers and limiting the frequency with which the shifts occur. Likewise, the number of keys you need to find could be reduced. I ended the first League video by listing some existing regions I thought my gyms and their leaders might fit within, and since I don't trust myself to draft a wholly original region to house them all in while still having time for other things, I'll settle for a looser, more retrospective approach. Octavia's Conservatory is already so fiercely Unova-coded in my mind, and the fact that New York City's home to schools like Juilliard and the Manhattan School of Music only reinforce that. My facility's exterior is modeled on the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music in Milwaukee though, so maybe it could be situated in a future Unova neighbor or expansion inspired by the states bordering the Great Lakes. A more Midwestern spin could certainly suit a woodchuck-inspired Pokémon like Acapella and its unrevealed evolution. I already mentioned the caverns where Cal's gym is set were initially inspired by memories of places like American state and national parks. But the salt mine aesthetic was drawn specifically from the Wieliczka salt mine in southern Poland. That same salt mine also inspired one of my favorite locations in my Zelda-inspired D&D game. Alternatively, the caverns I described would be a much better use of Galler's mines than all the good Sword and Shield did with them. Weaver's Gym was originally going to be set entirely underground, like a cross between a trapdoor spider's burrow and an ant colony. That was before Calliston's gym crystallized, however. I nearly pushed Weaver to a future entry when I remembered the Akira Kurosawa film Throne of Blood. It's an adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth, and its feudal Japanese setting swaps Great Burnham Wood and Dunsinane Hill for Spider's Web Forest and Spider's Web Castle. It just rewrote itself. Weaver's character design is even derived from the fortune-telling spirit in the movie, who creeps out my brother to this day. Johto strikes me as a great choice for this gym. Maybe in an alternate timeline, what we know as Azalea Town was the site of an old stronghold. Its proximity to the sea could even account for the presence of an aquatic creature like Araquanid. Of course, the structure of the maze would work best in a 3D game, which would mean seeing Johto from an all-new perspective. But what do you think? Where would you place these gyms if it were up to you? Would they replace existing gyms? What sort of team would you bring to challenge each of them? And most importantly, how do the trials I've described compare to those seen in the actual games? I'd love to read your ideas in the comments. If you enjoyed the video enough to make it this far, please consider liking the video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel for more if you haven't already. I'm thinking about setting up memberships if folks are interested in supporting this sort of work monetarily, but in the meantime, one of the best things you can do to help is to go watch another one of my videos. If this is the first of my League videos you've stumbled across, consider checking out the previous entry, where I laid out concepts for a grass, fire, and water gym respectively. If you want to know my thoughts on the actual mainline gyms, I've got shorts talking about each of them in turn, as well as videos expanding on them like my Rebuilding Johto's Gyms video. Like I mentioned back at the top of this video, I've also curated an accompanying playlist if you want to see more about normal, rock, and bug gyms specifically. If you picked up on the Zelda influence in Weaver's Gym and want to see how I apply my puzzle design principles to a Legend of Zelda setting, you should check out Dungeon Diaries. Not only does it feature more of the Game Boy Color aesthetic you've been seeing throughout this video, it breaks down puzzles and other obstacles I've run with actual players by way of my home D&D game. I'm also posting original art from this video and others to my Instagram if you want another platform to enjoy it on. Special thanks goes out to everyone who responded so kindly to the first League video, and to all those fans whose creations have inspired me to further pursue my own. And to everyone else, thanks for watching.